Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming to our AREAA 3-point policy training. We have a number of subjects that we want to talk about. First off, I want to thank all of you for coming. The AREAA is very proud of our history, of what we've been able to do on the advocacy side, and that's what separates us from other organizations, rather than just being a fun networking group, which of course we are as well. But we also have a very important mission, and that's what bands us together, to be able to go to Washington, D.C., to be able to talk to our lawmakers and to address the issues that help clear the way for home ownership and to create generational wealth. The biggest defining difference of wealth in our country is home ownership. NAR did a study once, and they said in a 10-year span, the average renter, and of course this study by NAR is a little bit dated, so these numbers might be slightly off, but you'll get the point. The average net worth of the renter after 10 years was $5,000. The average net worth of the homeowner was $250,000. That's not a small gap. That's a huge chasm. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to make the American dream possible for everybody and not just for a few. And there are some big issues currently right now that we're addressing nationally. The biggest issue, of course, is affordability. The lack of inventory right now in this country is a major, major problem. The inflation causing high rates on top of that is making it even more exasperating. But we all know about the multiple offer stories, about people having to pay $1 million over asking. This basically eliminates the possibility for first-time home buyer with a minimum FHA 3.5% loan to compete with somebody who's paying an enormous amount above and beyond and waiving all. It's just a major problem. The disparate impact on the AAPI community cannot be understated. It's not just a problem. It is a problem for all of us, but it is especially a problem for those in the AAPI community. We are not just a monolith. We have millennials, first generation people coming here that have a major challenge, that are trying to, and on top of the fact that they have the multiple offers, and on top of the fact that there's no inventory and there's high rates, they also have the hurdle of just fair housing and people being prejudiced and not accepting their offers. These are very, very big problems in our country. So one of the things that we're trying to do is we're trying to find bills to try to address it. The first bill that we have to address affordability is called the American Housing and Economic Mobility Bill. I'm going to read the first sentence word for word verbatim, and then I will go into a little bit more of a discussion one. But I thought it was an important enough wording that I'd like to read it. Housing is the largest expense for most American families, and costs are rising every day in almost every community in America. Rural, suburban, urban, it's getting harder to rent a house or put together a down payment. That's partly because government housing policy has failed working families. Instead of supporting development and promoting competition, local governments have imposed needless rules that substantially raise the cost of buying or renting a home. At the same time, the federal government has steadily reduced investment in producing housing for lower income and middle class families, which create shortages that drive up costs for everyone. It produces crumbling and unsafe housing stock in many urban and rural communities and slows economic growth. Money for formerly redlined and segregated areas especially. Homeownership is a primary way that American families build wealth, but for decades, misguided and discriminatory federal policies have excluded millions of families from the American dream. The disparate impact on the redlined and segregated communities cannot be understated. That is one of the things I like about this bill, because it does address putting money into those to try to correct that problem and to help those communities that need it the most. The federal funding bill is specifically looking to build 3 million new housing units. Inventory is the biggest problem right now. With not enough inventory and with skyrocketing appreciation on housing, it cannot be understated how important in creating more inventory is to that affordability issue. The second thing, it will be investing $445 billion in the Housing Trust Fund to build and rehabilitate low-income housing. $2.5 billion is set aside for Native American and Hawaiians. The PI community has long been ignored because the size of the PI community. A lot of people call it AAPI, and they don't look specifically at the PI community. The PI community, the Native Hawaiians, the Samoans, the Polynesians, they need our help. Their home ownership numbers are incredibly low in comparison. And I think the set aside is one of the first steps toward trying to make some correction to that issue. $4 billion also is set aside for something that a lot of people have ignored. It's the new middle, it's the new missing middle, if anyone has read the book before. $4 billion is now going, in this bill, will be set aside for the new middle income housing emergency fund to build homes for the middle class. And that will be used in perpetuity for those who are in the missing middle. So we'll continue to try to supply housing. A lot of people, the rich may not need as much help. The people that are on low income housing are on everybody's radar, but the people that are just slightly above the low income and don't qualify, it's a huge swath of people in America, and it is something that needs to be addressed. So the missing middle is another part that I like about what this bill actually also helps support. And then the final thing is reduce the cost of building. Government has to be part of the solution. So to reduce the cost of building, this bill includes investing $10 billion in incentives to help local governments with grant money for infrastructure, but they have to prove reform for land use rules that restrict production of new affordable housing. This is a huge carrot and a huge opportunity for us to be able to right the ship. We have to be able to make it easier for people to build affordable housing. And the biggest problem is trying to help with the land use and the permitting, so it's possible to do that. Okay. I have been doing all the talking here, so I'm going to hand it off. I'm going to open up the room a little bit for, well, let's see, let me go through the 3 points first, and then I'm going to open it up for discussion. So the second point that we have on our 3-point plan after affordability is fair housing. Joyce, who is our just came back freshly from NAR, is going to tell us a little bit about the fair housing point. Also, Joyce, could you share a little bit about what's been happening in Washington, D.C. on the NAR front as well?
Sure. Thank you so much, Vincent. And hello, everyone throughout the United States. Before I begin, I just wanted to mention a couple of big wins that we had last week in California. I just came back from the California Association of Realtors legislative meetings, and legislative day, where we actually had a day that we did meet with our assembly members and our senators here in California. We were so fortunate to be able to have face-to-face with them throughout the state. So, and we had two major issues that we were asking of them. And while we were there last week, these two issues actually made it to their floor, the Assembly and to the Senate, because we had one issue for each, and it passed favorably for what our ask was for them to either support or oppose. So there are 2,000 of us there advocating, and it really worked this time because they did vote with our ask. So the first one was in the Assembly. It's AB 2710. So those of you in California, you may be hearing more about this. But this is about rental properties for investors and their ability and how they will put their property on the market so that it goes to the open market for everyone to have an opportunity. Because again, with our lack of inventory, this will help. Historically, many times, the big corporations buy up a lot of these properties. So we were advocating for this bill for them to oppose it because this was going to keep the door open for the big investor companies to be able to gobble up these properties before all of us have an opportunity. So it actually went in our favor, and the Assembly did vote it down. So we will have an opportunity. And also to give the renters the first right of refusal to actually purchase the home that they're renting. So this was a huge win for us. And then along with some of our federal issues, we did have an issue for our senators to ask for more money in the budget for home ownership. We asked for an additional $200 million to the housing budget to help with down payment assistance. And we also asked for additional $400,000 to help with more development, for instance, like Habitat for Humanity, for these deed restricted type of properties, for more of them to be built to help with our inventory stock. And we asked the senators to please support this particular issue that was coming for them. And we had a win on that too. So we will have more money in the budget in California, specifically earmarked for these two projects. So I mention this because many times things start in California, migrates to the other states, and then could possibly then trigger Washington to have these types of issues on their radar, because the states will be presenting this type of issue because it's important to them too. So California this past week, when we were at the state capitol, did have some big wins. So with that, our NAR is still in session right now. So I don't have anything concrete for you. We are still holding our meetings. So once we finish those, I may have some more intel, recent, up to date of what's happening, because we're also in the midst of trying to meet either virtually or back home in the district with our senators and our representatives. So all that is happening right at this moment, real time. As far as our issue for fair housing, our second point, there's a bill, HR 4495, down payment towards the Equity Act of 2021. So again, like Vincent, I'd like to kind of read through this so that you kind of get a flavor of what the real background is and the issue of this bill. And then that way it'll be easier for us to have a conversation with our representatives, our congressional leaders on this. So the goal of this bill is to provide down payment assistance to first-generation home buyers to address multi-generational inequities in access to home ownership and to narrow ultimately and close the racial home ownership gap in the US, as well as some other purposes. The image of Asian Americans as wealthy and upper middle class, like the Crazy Rich Asian movie, is one that ignores the many economically disadvantaged groups of AAPIs within our country. So we're not the crazy rich Asian population as we were depicted in general. Low-income immigrants and refugees from Asian countries make up a large block of the AAPI community and frequently struggle to build generational wealth. This bill helps to ameliorate all those factors by providing greater financial access to hardworking Americans who are trying to increase their economic status. The importance of home ownership cannot be understated, as it is one of the main driving factors behind accumulation of wealth. Pursuing a fair housing bill that includes down payment assistance as well as anti-discriminatory regulation will create a safeguard at limiting discrimination against the AAPIs in the housing market, specifically the Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander community, which faces higher socioeconomic barriers. Down payment assistance could be a huge boon towards creating generational wealth for them. Furthermore, this bill includes conditions that are designed to make this a sustainable, viable effort. Recipients of this grant are required to complete a financially literacy course in order to better understand the housing market and are required to repay a certain amount in the event of a foreclosure. The assistance from this grant are required to remain in the community. Therefore, it helps to uplift the intended communities while keeping the focus of the assistance on those who need it most. So this will really help the specific communities where our AAI community do want to live, and it keeps the money in there and really helps to build those communities so that they all will stay there for generations and have this generational wealth. It's really a feeling of belonging for these people, and then they all converge together for community support. And this is something that is really lacking, especially with the prices. People are fragmented and just going where they can afford, whereas this down payment assistance can kind of help them stay where they really want to be. And so we're hoping that this bill, this is the positive effect of this bill, to really keep that community feeling and structure to where they really want to be instead of moving to where they can afford to be. So that's a little bit about our point 2. And Vincent, I'd like to pass the baton to you again for the point 3, our alternative credit.
Okay, so alternative credit, first off, to be proactive, I'm going to put the bill in the chat because everyone seems to want to know what the bills are. So the third one is alternative credit. The current credit criteria that's used for the credit scoring system right now in this country is a very, very antiquated formula that has been used for many, 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 many years. It basically looks at your mortgage, credit card companies, and your automobile. But there's so many other bills that are not being included. And the majority, the biggest problem with home ownership are that we did our study on. Thank you, Jordan. The biggest problem that we have for home ownership and for turn downs, when we did the statistics, were number one was for income, and we can't really legislate, no income. We know what that happened, what happened when they did that with subprime. But the second largest reason why there were turn downs in the AAPI community was lack of credit. Thin credit is what they call it. The reason why is the deep-founded principles that our parents and our parents have always taught us: don't borrow money, pay cash, don't put yourself in debt. Because of that, a lot of the bills that we are paying that are not reporting to the credit bureaus don't show up on our credit score. And so because of that, the Asians are considered credit invisible. And a large percentage of the turn downs that have happened with mortgages are because of this. This bill helps to address this by bringing the alternative credit or bringing the credit scoring into the more modern age by including things like the internet, your phone bills, your utility bills, your insurance payments, your student loan debts. Those things are, we know are things that the API community will pay, can pay and have been paying on a regular basis, but are not showing up on the credit bureau. So this specific bill is something that we in the past have already supported on HR 123, but that was just a pilot program. This will put it into a position where we believe that it will help a large majority or a lot of other people that are being turned down currently right now to be able to get the credit scoring that they need to be able to qualify for mortgages. Okay. The 3 points that we make, the reason when you go to DC that you make 3 points, of course, is if you show up in DC and you have 100 different reasons and complaints and this and that, you have to give them something they can actually work on. And so we, as a committee, sat down and we looked at many, many bills before we chose these three. These three we feel are doable. We feel that they are important, and we feel that these are bills that we, as an AEPA community and as AREAA, can support and can make a difference on. Help us when we go to Washington, DC. Help us to tell the lawmakers about the problems. Bring your stories. If any of you guys have stories about clients that you've helped before in the past, or people that have had problems being able to get a loan because of the alternative credit, but or people that have been discriminated against, or have had problems, or didn't want to move into a neighborhood because of hate crimes, because they had heard elderly get beaten in Chinatown and they didn't want to live there. Those kind of stories will help bring our story to the lawmakers. And then when they look at the three bills, hopefully we'll get passage and we'll remove 3 more hurdles and hopefully help our community to be able to create more home ownership and change this world one home at a time. Hope or Jordan, do you want to say anything to wrap up?
Yeah, let's, before I wrap up, I think it might be a good idea to just open it up to questions. I know we have quite a few of our members who are attending next week or on the call. So for For those of you who are attending our legislative days or our policy or diversity and fair housing summit and have set appointments to meet with either your congressional or Senate representatives, you're probably kind of like wondering or thinking, okay, how am I going to start the discussion and all of that stuff? In the last couple of webinars we've talked about kind of like the do's and don'ts, right, on your congressional and Senate visits, some of the logistics that are part of your meeting, how to follow up and all of that stuff. This time around, we wanted to really talk about the substance of the meeting, right? Why we are talking about what we're talking about. And most of our meetings are going to be 15-20 minutes long, and some of us have in-person meetings, some of us have virtual meetings, and some of us have the privilege of actually meeting with our representative. Some of us will be meeting with the staffers. There will be instances when you're probably going to meet with at least 2 or 3 staffers, even with COVID and all of that stuff. So they're going to ask, why are we meeting with you? And as Joyce and Vince had gone through the 3-point plan, it's relatively important that you take this 3 points and share your story from a local level, right? Because at the end of the day, they're going to ask, well, how does this impact the community that they serve? For me, how does this impact the 53rd district here in San Diego, where Sarah Jacobs actually is my congressional representative. And I'm going to talk about, just as Vince had said, housing affordability and the lack of inventory. I live in a zip code that's 92103, and there's hardly any inventory. And it's a problem because if I want to, let's say, move to a larger home, there's hardly anything that is out there that I could choose from, and it's driving prices higher and higher. So take it into context and make sure that you apply it to where you are living. Or alternative credit. Vince, you are in the lending side, right? You are on the mortgage side of the real estate profession. And as he had said, many of our community members, particularly for immigrants, it's not a problem of having bad credit. It's a problem of having thin credit. And maybe you have a personal story that you can share of perhaps your client, or perhaps you or a family member who have applied for mortgage, and because of the thin credit file issue, have either been asked to apply again so that they have time to build their credit, or have been denied the mortgage application. So, kind of like tell that story. I remember when we were talking about language access, this was a few years ago, and we started talking about language access. And part of the issue was that, how do you actually legislate language access? How do you legislate inventory, right? How do you legislate a lot of the things? And we are very, very fortunate and blessed this year that we can actually point to legislation that's out there in support of our 3-point plan. That doesn't happen all the time. Sometimes we have 3 points and there's no legislation to point to, because the call to action typically, as you wrap up those meetings with your representatives, is, well, tell us, how can we support, let's say, alternative credit, or how can we support fair housing and all of that stuff. We can actually point to a legislation that's out there, right? That we can say, can the congressman or the congresswoman support this particular bill, whether it's HR 123 or whatever that is, because it supports our policy plan. But going back to language access, I remember one of our members telling a story of one of her clients taking a 7-year-old at the closing table because of translation issues. And she was almost in tears and very emotional because here's a 7-year-old who's translating documents that are binding documents, contracts, right? That his parents were going to sign, but because of the lack of support when it comes to language access, this child was going to be responsible for the liability that comes, with translating documents and such. So personal stories are powerful, right? And maybe it was you who was a child, just like Tom Trong, who had to do translation for his mom. So personal stories are very powerful because they're testimonies of why we need to support these particular priorities. If you're comfortable enough to share them, that is. And so use your own words, right? I mean, obviously what is on the leave behind piece, the 3-point plan, are very technical and very sort of like politically written so that it's actually for the staffer. But I would say look through the 3-point plan. It's written in a way that we can actually absorb it pretty quickly, but think of yourself, think of your personal story, think of your clients, think of our community and why this is important, because that's what they want to hear, right? Why is this important for them and our community, and how does this actually move the needle of homeownership for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders? Because at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to remove barriers to home ownership, right? So that we can increase the home ownership rate for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. So I'll stop with that. I'll stop with my platitudes and all of that stuff. And I think we can open it up to questions. Jordan, was there anything else that you wanted to say while we're looking at questions, possible questions?
Yeah, not too much more to add. I think you guys have really all broken down the points really beautifully and really concisely. So I appreciate that. And, it's really important, as we talk about these points, to just kind of reflect about all the policy wins that AREAA has already seen, and to know that we do have the ability to make a difference. When we go to DC, we've talked about the No Other campaign, how we worked with the census to create that Asian category, which allowed us to see more accurate information on homeownership rates for the Asian community. And of course, we have language translation for the AREAA forms, as well as recently we had Freddie Mac announce that they were trying to find ways to build credit through rental history. So we really are seeing lots of wins, and that's why what we're doing is so important, because we can kind of continue to build on what we've done. And with that, I don't have much more to add. You guys have broken everything thoroughly.
Yeah. And just to echo what Jordan had said, right? We are making a difference. And I don't know that that you guys know the impact of what we do from from an advocacy standpoint, right? To actually have a huge bureaucracy like the US Census Bureau to change their reporting is phenomenal. And when we embarked on that particular initiative in 2016, we thought it would be like 3 or 4 years. We didn't expect that it would be a matter of like 4 or 5 months, right? By July 2016, we started the campaign in January of 2016. By July 2016, the US Census has changed its reporting. So if you take a look at the American Community Survey, right, on the quarterly survey, prior to 2016, we as Asian Americans did not have our standalone category. So in July of 2016, that's when you'll start seeing a standalone category for Asian Americans, because we were lumped into the category called Other. A very, very important win for us, huge win. And then, again, from the mortgage side, now FHFA is making it mandatory for lenders and for banks to use the supplemental consumer information form, right, that asks for language preference. And that's huge because in 2017, when we embarked on this whole initiative to add the PLDF, or the preferred language data field, PLDF, into the AREAA form, and the AREAA form, Vince, as you know, how many times does it get changed? Very rarely, right? Because it's an expensive proposition when we change the AREAA form.
I should mention, they made a major change for the first time in maybe 30 years, and they excluded the language preference, and they made it a supplemental form just to appease the voters, but not to make it mandatory, so nobody implemented. So making it mandatory yesterday was a huge victory.
Yes.
This was not something that comes easy. FHFA rarely makes those kinds of changes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I just want to also, when we're talking about victories that AREAA has been able to have, the like no other was huge. I think this is a big victory for us as well. This was one of our 3 points last year. We asked for language access, and we specifically told the lawmakers the story. And we've been saying this for a while now, the stories of how, Trung, when he was a little boy, had to go to the closing table and say, what's a prepayment penalty in Vietnamese? I mean, how is he going to translate that, right? It's ridiculous that, so many of us have had to do that for our parents. Being that's just another one of our victories. What we're doing matters, and we are making a difference. And oh, by the way, there were a couple of questions I just wanted to mention. Somebody asked, is this being recorded? We have a 3-part series, and we're going to release all 3 of them, so you'll have the recordings. The first one was with Irene talking about how you can make congressional appointments. The second one was with NAR telling us about how to do the meetings when you get there. And then this particular one, which is talking about more of the nuts and bolts of the 3 points. There was one other question, and I'm not exactly sure what Mauricio was saying here. Would we take additional considerations? We will take, there are considerations that have to be taken in terms of security that, we all have to abide by because of, previous things that have happened in the Capitol before, if that's what you're asking. So, of course, those are mandatory for everybody, including us. We can't just walk up the steps of the White House anymore, if that's what you're asking, because of what happened before with the riots. Okay. Let's see. Do we have any other questions, or is there anything else that we can talk about here?
I don't have a question, Vince, but I do have some housekeeping items for those of you who are wondering, will we have the printed copy of the 3-point plan? And the answer is yes. For those of us who will be going to in-person meetings with our representatives, there will be copies of the actual 3-point plan to be distributed in person, but we will also have copies of the 3-point plan digitally. And I think, Jordan, we can probably make that available to all of the attendees already who have registered, so that they have that handy, both the truncated version and the extended or elongated version. And there was a question about the State of Asia America report. We can share that as well. Vanessa and Jordan, I don't know how you want to handle this as an embargoed copy, because the wide distribution and the circulation and the launch of it will not be until the 11th of May. So we wanted to make sure that that coincides with our sort of like release and our press release and our press conference and all of that stuff. So all of those copies will be, printed copies will be made available. In fact, it is being printed as we speak, and will be will be available in DC. And for those of you who have in-district meetings, let us know. We will, Jessica, Jordan, and Eloisa will probably need to coordinate the number of copies that we will be sending to each of the chapters.
There's a couple comments in here. Tom Trong says the idea of sharing. Yes, that's a super great idea, Tom. It'd be great for AREAA to put press out so we can all celebrate the recent win, which has been one of the 3 points for years. Are there marketing materials out now that we can share as an organization? I think those are being worked on. I don't think we have anything specific, Tom, but yes, that has been one of our 3 points for many years now. And I think a significant victory. And thank you for helping in your year as well.
Yeah, for sure.
I think it can't be understated how important something that big, you know, FHFA doesn't change for anybody. It took 30, I think I've been 40 years I've been in lending, and the application did not change the entire time. It was the first time that I saw a change at the end of 40 years, and they didn't include that. They tried to make it a supplement, but now they've included it and made it mandatory. It's a big victory. It's a huge victory. Let's see, somebody else was saying, bring market data. That's very important. Yes. Bring specific market data and stats to your area for home ownership. That's an important thing to bring to your meetings as well. Yes, thank you very much. Yes, and yes, Tom, we should be vocal. We need to stand up, and we need to that's the point of what we're doing. We are not one person complaining. We're 18,000 people advocating. So that's what AREAA is, and that's what we do. We are trying to do together. Let's see. Issues being currently lots of media press. Yes, there are protesters. We understand, Mauricio, and of course we will be cognizant of trying to keep our group safe and also to follow the guidelines of what is out there. Okay. Those who have Zoom sessions during the summit, is there space in the hotel for the chapters to take the Zooms together? That I am not sure we have access to rooms where they will allow us to all gather to be able to do something like that. So Carrie says, I do not believe we have planned spaces for Zooms. I think what would happen is similar to what we're doing here. You would have your laptop in your room, and then or your cell phones, and then you can do your visits that way. I've done virtual visits with our local legislators exactly like this. We all come into a room, we all say our points, and we say hi. Usually the legislator will do something very similar to what we're doing. Okay. All right. I think I want to make sure that I'm not excluding any last questions, but I think I'm going to give people back 15 minutes of their day. If not, I really appreciate all of you. I'm, you know, I say this every time, but you know, at my wedding, when we had we gave everybody, we had 650 people at the wedding that we gave gold-plated little chopsticks with a little saying on it. And, you know, one chopstick by itself is useless. That's why we get married. But together, we are a bundle. One chopstick is easy to break, but we're an 18,000 member bundle that's unbreakable. That's what AREAA is. Together, we can make a difference. I want to thank each and every one of you guys for coming to this meeting, for coming to DC, for your interest in AREAA, for what you do on your local chapters, for what we are all doing to advocate together. Together, we can all make a difference, and we can be that bundle, and we can be that unbreakable bundle, and we can make a difference one home ownership at a time.
Great. Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you, everybody.
everyone. We'll
Thank
see
you,
you.
everyone.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.